Hello, everybody. All right. I give everybody one more minute to have transitioned from whatever they were doing for the last hour, and then we will get started. How's everybody doing this first Wednesday of December?
Feels very busy.
Yes.
It can't be December. I'm sorry, it just turned into September, so it can't be accurate.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Someone was like, let's do something the end of next week. I'm like, oh, that seems far too late. That's practically January, and I'm not ready for that as a reality yet. So okay, let's go ahead and we'll jump in. And all right, we're using Canva instead of PowerPoint. So give me a second to see if I can figure out how to put the deck up. Can you all see that?
Yep.
Outstanding. Okay, give me one quick second. So hi, welcome to the December RPI call. Both a lot has happened since we talked a month ago, and not much has happened since we talked a month ago. So we will get into all of that. General reminder, as we're going through, if you've got something to add, either jump in, throw it in the chat, raise your hand, and we'll pull you in. Erica and Aisha and I are gonna, lead this agenda, but this is very conversational as we're going through. So all right. Our agenda today, we do have some updates. Hey, the government's reopened since we last talked. That's a thing that happened. So we'll talk about some updates from Congress. We'll talk about some USDA updates. We've got a little bit of space for you all to jump in with updates from your work or pieces that you're seeing in the general policy space that we all need to know. And then per our conversation last month, we're really going to dive into MAHA. Maha is huge and there's many facets, and Erica has done this absolutely beautiful mapping of the pieces and where they're focused, and we will share that with you all to look at in more detail. But we're also going to look at it together and really start to see, Maha has churned up a lot in the world about what is in our food and what shouldn't be in our food. Are there pieces where we as RPI, as the Soil and Climate Alliance, can be engaging with pieces of the Maha universe to move any of this forward? Because there's a bunch of things they're right about. So how do we bring that in together? We're also going to hear from our dear friend Jeff at EWG about how they're approaching it, because they have a really great approach to engaging with Maha and bringing in the good and leaving out the not so good. And then we'll talk about those leverage points. So I'm going to dive in. Like I said, raise hands, just jump in and be like, hey, Jessica, I've got something, and we will just keep rolling. So the government reopened. Huzzah. People got to travel for the holidays if that is something that you are into. Part of that reopening was they the approps for ag, military construction, and was it interior was the third one in that? And the third piece. So, and with that came a farm bill extension into 2026. Just a reminder, we were supposed to have a new one in 23. Um, so that gives us farm bill funding until September 30th of 26. But it also came with $100 million cuts to NRCS, CTAs, and defunds a lot of the food safety measures. So that seems vaguely problematic. We do expect the administration to announce an aid package for US farmers and potentially a deal on Chinese soybean purchases. They are about 20 billion, they being China are about 20 billion behind in purchasing, and Trump has been showing his anger to the Chinese government the last few days, so we'll see if anything comes from that. There's been some chat the last few weeks that AMP, which was formerly known as the Partnership for Climate Smart Commodities, could be re-extending funding to some grantees who were cut out earlier this year. There was a flurry of phone calls that went out to grant recipients before Thanksgiving asking for conversations. If anyone knows anything, let me know. All of my folks I've talked to are like, yes, we had conversations and it's all gone radio silent. Also key from that, we are not allowed to say climate smart anymore. We say stewardship now in the US government. So remember that, friends. Um, we're continuing to watch for SNAP changes, which we know will affect consumers and farmers and retailers and just everybody else in this space. And as well as tracking what might happen with the ACA exemption extensions, because that was the big sticking point for the government. There was supposed to be a vote in December, but we shall see. We're sort of watching all of these different pieces as they come down the pike. Any key updates that I missed in that super duper quick? Of course, Landcore has created a piece on this because they're amazing.
Yeah, I'd love to hear other updates from the field, from you all.
Uh, I would just add that EWG, we updated our conservation database. It's conservation.ewg.org.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeff. Aria, what do you got?
I think maybe one piece of um, note was in the funding package that there were provisions that made it harder for USDA to continue cutting staff or offices from the overall agency, just given that that's been such an issue of concern and that staff levels so determine that the funding levels for individual programs are almost arbitrary if there aren't the staff to get it out the door. So the fact that there was a provision that was firmly in the category of less bad in regards to staff cuts is something that I know would be easy to miss. So just wanted to flag that. And that's highlighted in that blog post that we just put in the chat.
Awesome. I don't know why there was just a drum roll. That was fun. I'm not going to touch this screen, so just go with me on the messiness because I'm now a little scared of Canva today. Don, anything from your work that you wanna drop in?
No, I've been following the changes. It's just like you. I don't have anything to add on that.
Okay. Yeah, we're all sort of watching to see what they've said versus what they do, because that's something we'll come back to in a few minutes with the Maha discussion. Okay. If you think of something as we're going through, please jump in. If you've ever got updates, great papers or blog posts or anything, when we send out emails, you can just hit reply all on those and it will go to like all 247 people on the RPI mailing list. So feel free to use that as a resource, or if you're looking for something, or if you just, if you're looking for something and you just want to ping me and ask about it, please feel free. With that said, Erica, I'm going to hand it over to you. You're on mute, Erica.
Thank you. Like many of you, we have been thinking a lot about and following closely the priorities and actions of MAHA. And as we started to dive deeper, really realized that we didn't really fully understand what Maham was in terms of, it's not necessarily like a monolith and there are different components to it. So we started out a process where we were looking at kind of doing a little bit of stakeholder mapping. We looked at who the core Maha groups are, and we looked at their priorities and as well as their actual actions. So we put together this report that I'm dropping in the chat, and it is very much a draft report. We welcome all your feedback on it. Currently, it's in a Google Doc, it's in comment mode. So please feel free to read through, make comments. If you have anything you'd really like to add, you could always email us as well. But please feel free. This is really a working document at this point. And I can basically kind of start like I won't pull the report up, but I'll continue to reference it on the next couple of slides. So if you want to move to the next slide. So first thing we did was came up with 4 key MAHA kind of groups, I guess, key stakeholder areas. And one is the Trump administration. Jess, is there any way to make that a little bit bigger? Or people can also just go right into the Google Doc if you have access to that, to see it a little bit bigger. But the 4 areas are, the Trump administration, that includes the Maha Commission, that they formed. Oh, that's great. Thank you. There's Congress and the Maha congressional caucuses, both on the Senate and House side. There are Maha advocates, right? The Maha moms, farmers, influencers. And then there are also Maha state level leaders, so policymakers and other leaders kind of at the state level. So those are the sort of 4 that we came up with for now. And really, we kind of looked at each one of those for priorities. And then later we'll look at them for what has actually happened and been accomplished. And really started to see their similar priorities, as well as some of them have different priorities. Some of them are actually there's tension between some of these groups around specifically around specific issues like pesticides. And Aisha, Aisha actually created this map. Is there anything you want to kind of share about the bubbles and the color coding?
Yeah, I mean, it was just kind of a way to sort of think through what is getting supported. Part of the big document, the report that Erica put together, is to identify where who's focused on these issues and to what extent. And so this is sort of an easy visualization where you can see like the big 4 that are getting the most attention and have the most support from all of the different sectors and factions of Maha are sort of centered. Removal of food additives is the biggest one that they've actually made traction on. But then to the outside edges, there's things like the pesticide reduction commitments that were stated, but actually are only being supported by 2 of the groups, really, and are not being supported or actively being worked against by others. And it's sort of maybe adjacent to soil health and region ag, maybe adjacent to nutrient dense foods, but it's sort of like out there on its own. No one's really touching it because it's something of a hot button tension issue. And similarly, on the other upper left-hand side, corporate control and the sort of fight against big pharma and big ag is another one that is, brought up here and there in conversations among certain individuals largely, but it's not getting the support that it was, especially um, pre the administration coming into office in January. It was getting a lot more support and conversations around Maha last year than it is now. And so, we know how politics work among this group. We know how that goes, but that was such a major point previously. So it's interesting to see that it's sort of out there on its own. There's still a little bit of commitment in certain speeches from RFK, and from the advocates, largely the ones who are championing it, but it's not really going anywhere right now. And it's very much, only brought up in some connections to, food as medicine conversations, a little bit of the chronic disease prevention topics, but by and large, it's gone by the wayside.
So the report kind of lays out, how, some of their priorities, but as well as the actions that they've taken. And Jess, if you could move to the next slide. So this is just a very quick summary of kind of what they said and what they've done. In regenerative agriculture, given how, it's stated as a priority with the commission, it's stated as a priority for the caucuses, it's certainly been stated as a priority um, for Secretary Kennedy, not necessarily, probably Secretary Rollins as much, but soil health she's talked about soil health. And I think overall, very little has been done around soil health and regenerative agriculture. I mean, there's, cuts to programs, cuts to staff. Like Aria was saying, when staff is downgraded, it's hard to have get the money out the door for one, and also have that technical assistance. Um, but I mean, obviously, we don't have a farm bill yet, so and I know Land Corps tracks bills, and there have been some bipartisan uh, bills that have been introduced. So, I guess some of this will remain to be seen what if we end up getting a farm bill next year and what will actually be in it around soil health. But I would say overall, there's been not great movement on regenerative agriculture. Just in terms of food systems should heal people and not hurt them. Yeah, they certainly have done their things around red food dyes, and have a bill around grass. FDA is generally recognized as safe and trying to make some changes there. But as you see from that report, I think a lot of that overall is very small in the scheme of things and even falls short. Um, they've talked about food as medicine, haven't really done a whole lot there. There has been even changes and some negative changes in, for example, the GusNIP program. So the only really food system program that funds food as medicine. And again, a lot of food as medicine program is funded through Medicaid waivers. So I think a lot of things around food as medicine remain to be seen. They're talking a lot about health savings accounts and flexible savings spending for food. So using some of those healthcare dollars. We made a note in the document though that we really we are not we are it's great to have HSAs be used for food. We would love to see that, and we also do not want to see. There's been conversation around these. This should replace, healthcare premium subsidies. So we just wanted to make that small point that we are not for cutting those premium subsidies. And then local food, there's been so many cuts to local food programs. I don't have time to go into them all, but overall, that has not been. I think there's been a lot of negative things that have happened in that regard. And we have a full table on the very last page of the report that you can check out, and would love to hear your comments on that. So I think next we were going to go to have Jeff talk about sort of EWG. I mean, you've had a long stance and worked very hard over many years on a lot of these issues that Maha has saying is a priority. And, just love to hear kind of your take on that, how you're approaching this administration, and the work you're doing now. And then we can have a large group conversation after that.
Yeah, thank you. I think, for EWG, it's been an interesting bit of a journey with particularly Maha. As you all know, especially on food and things like food dyes and food chemicals, EWG was out there in the very beginning working on these issues. We led the bills in California that were really the first to address this, including in UPFs. And then you kind of see this movement, this Maha movement pop up and really kind of take hold. So we've worked closely with them, in particularly on the food chemical side. A lot of the state food chemical bills, like in West Virginia and Virginia, um, a little bit more so than other places like in Texas, where, again, we weren't really involved in the Texas one, but I think I've worked cooperatively in a lot of these other states. We've also engaged in this movement on several state pesticide issues. This includes in Pennsylvania, where Republican Natalie Mihalik is the lead on what's called the Healthy PA package. The bills include not just addressing food chemicals and UPFs, but also a ban on the use of paraquat, which is an herbicide connected to Parkinson's disease. And then thirdly, we've worked with them on these pesticide preemption issues and this chemical company liability shield that has popped up both in the state level because of failure to warn legislation, as well as nationally in, say, harmful policy riders. Got a lot of news about Section 453 uh, this past year, even though these riders have been included years past. It also ended up making it in the news from past farm bills, including last year's House markup, where there was, again, a lot of discussion preempting state and local pesticide laws. This has been a strategy for particularly the pesticide manufacturers, going back to the very first glyphosate case that RFK Jr. himself was involved in, because they were trying to undercut both the standing as well as hide behind the EPA labels. So it's something where we've found alignment with MAHA, but that hasn't come without its risks. I think just amongst us friends, there's been a fair amount of pushback whenever, say, on like our socials, if you look at like some EWG Instagram posts, there are some, things go off the rails, which is true for any, I think, comment section anywhere on the internet, but particularly true when it comes to these issues where, we'll talk about a pesticide and they'll say, why aren't you doing this? Or we'll talk about a food chemical or risk to children, and you see, these people pop up and, why aren't you talking about vaccines? So we felt compelled to do a post clarifying EWG's stance and endorsement on vaccines and fluoride. And, a lot of negative comments were there. We also caught flack then on that issue from some of the partners that we work with in the MAHA space on, again, the food chemical issue. Where people ended up kind of dropping off their support or, moving off of the coalition. So I think broadly our goal is to work in tandem with them where we align and trying to stay as hyper focused as possible. That's been our strategy. Um, it has proven beneficial to show, again, the bipartisan nature of a lot of these fights, as well as demonstrating uh, opposition from folks that aren't just liberal environmental organizations, but Republican voting blocs to some of these other priorities to show, hey, there isn't a consensus amongst Republicans. Um, this, again, overall, I think what I have discovered in this is that these folks are hyper loyal to Trump and RFK Jr. In their minds, they are being restricted and unfairly influenced by, in this case, the pesticide industry and big ag and food companies. Um, you see this kind of pop up in several of the letters that groups have done. I'll put one in the chat here, but this was a letter to President Trump to oppose, chemical liability shields. Um, you also kind of see this pop up in, say, the MAHA strategy report that came out in September, where part of the report was about getting rid of industry influence in these industries, like in pharma and doing that. But there's absolutely no mention in there of EPA or pesticide influence, despite EPA's current political appointees and who those staffers are. So these folks are hyper loyal to Trump and RFK. Having said that, they have no allegiance to Lee Zeldin or Brooke Rollins or anyone at EPA, and they hate that former pesticide and ag lobbyists are in charge over there. So that's been particularly beneficial to kind of point them in the proper direction in their advocacy, and I think arming them with the tools and knowledge that we have from being in this fight for so long. And I think they can see that Republicans are stiff arming them on particularly pesticide issues and this pesticide liability fight that again popped up with Section 453, where Mike Simpson dismissed them as uneducated advocates, And the administration, time and time again, is just happy to use them as an electorate and just pay lip service. But when it comes down to agriculture, they're going to side with food companies and big business. Uh, Lastly, in the Maha report, I'll mention again pesticides. You can see that transition where the initial report mentions three pesticides by name, and the only time then in the final product that pesticides are mentioned is a repeat of CropLife talking points. And CropLife is the trade association that represents the pesticide manufacturers. So you kind of see again how like they feel that they're co-opted, and of course, the big news this week is the administration siding with Bayer in urging the Supreme Court to take up some of these failure to warn cases. I put our news release in the comments in that chat as well. But again, another example of kind of how Republicans in Congress are kind of treating these folks, how the administration is treating these folks, and really where their advocacy hasn't been very effective is on the pesticide front. At the state level, RFK Jr. is happy to go to Oklahoma, to uh, happy to go to Texas and go to West Virginia and tout the progress that states are making on food chemicals. And then they turn around and give tacit endorsement to, federal preemption of food chemical bills. Um, I know Erica in her piece mentioned the Marshall, the Better Grass Act. um, that was a bill that was supposed to be introduced in April, and it would have included a federal preemption of uh, on state food chemical bills. So while they're touting their progress, they're giving their endorsement to federal preemption. And then you see, a bunch of the Maha folks came out. We did a series of lobby days, and that bill that Marshall said he was going to introduce in April ended up getting delayed and delayed until getting introduced in October without the preemption, but including other language that is really bad on our food safety laws. So that's kind of in sum where we've been with them. It's been both positive and negative, just in terms of reactions from very different constituencies. But to have success, I think giving them direction, uh, keeping them engaged. One thing that I found early on was a lot of the Maha folks said, "Oh, we activate once text is out, or we activate once we see something." Which is not ideal because then it's already out there and it's encased. So trying to, I think, use our knowledge and expertise on these issues to keep them engaged early on.
Amazing, Jeff. That was so succinct. And I have so many questions. I mean, do you feel that like the grassroots side of Maha, the advocates are kind of ultimately the um like do you feel like that there's like staying power with this movement, even if with this administration, if a whole lot doesn't get done? And then I guess a follow-up question is just like when you work with Maha groups, say, so those examples you gave at the state level, are they kind of individual folks and influencers? Are they typically more of I'm trying to think of Zen Honeycutt's group,
Moms
Moms
across America.
Across America. Yeah, like are there like how many groups? I know of a handful, but it feels like a lot of them are influencers, and then there's like a few groups, but just love your take on that.
Yeah. I think at the state level, it really has depended. So in Virginia on food chemicals, it was um, not Moms for Liberty, but it was like Virginia Mom, for freedom, some combination of those words. In West Virginia, it was really an individual person, a state lobbyist who considers herself Maha. She didn't have a group, although she's part of Moms Across America, but just on her own, finding out more and more, decided to take this on. So I think it really depends at that level. Uh, I think on ag issues, it's been, yeah, a combination of influencers, uh, and their advocates and their people on Facebook and social media responding and taking action. Um, but I think more broadly, the influencers that then create groups to engage further have been the ones who are most effective. I do think there's staying power. Uh, it's a little bit of a cult of personality. Um, I think that over the last year, they've grown a little bit more frustrated. You see quotes from Zen about, scoring votes in Capitol Hill, which would be a huge change. Um, but I think that they felt they had all these promises. Trump himself came out and said, well, we're going to get pesticides out of our food. Um, and they feel like they're getting stonewalled by, industry. Um, or, entrenched House Republicans that they have no loyalty to. It does kind of remind me a little bit of going back to the Tea Party days where you saw this group kind of pop up. And then also reminds me of like, 2016, 2015 Trump, where people didn't take it seriously. And there was like this internal Republican reckoning where, there's going to be like some Republican shift. Uh, I don't know if it'll be that bad, but like they have no allegiance to like G.T. Thompson or um, who they feel are entrenched Republicans. So I think that there's enough sticking power for the next, 2.5, 3 years to make a difference and to hopefully, again, demonstrate that there isn't consensus amongst Republicans, right? They only need to peel off a handful um, to get their support or endorsement.
That's assuming if the Democrats all went with those few Republicans, so right.
Right, right, right. That's,
Right.
that's
And a
another.
bill actually came to pass. It's so interesting your state. Oh yeah, the state work. I feel like there's some ripe opportunity there.
Yeah,
Other
and
And
California, it was led by. Oh, go ahead.
it was Democrat, right? Or both.
Yeah, it was, technically it ended up being bipartisan, but, especially the first few fights were entirely Democrats, and then, it ended up getting bipartisan votes. But the bill leads, it wasn't any of the Maha groups that were listed as endorsers originally.
oh, I have a question that I'm going to pose sort of to you, but also anyone else wants to chime in because it's kind of a broad question that is a nice transition into the second half of what we're talking about following this. But it does seem, just like your thoughts on it, it does seem like there's this interesting that we've all dealt with tension between the fact that these are largely policies that were supported by Democrats and by left-leaning liberal groups. And there's been this language shift that there's a realignment, that this is Mahan, it's Republican coded. But if we've been in it, we know that factually, like these are bills that we were championing under a different set of terms last year, and the year before that, and the year before that. And so just curious about thinking of that like realignment that might be coming up in the Republican Party with Maha and the ability for this group to have some real staying power and to make some changes. What is your sense on the ability to draw them back into our fold and to craft those allegiances that are maybe a little bit outside? I mean, we also know that we've dealt with, you know, corporate interest Democrats, and that's been a barrier that we've challenged before, right? So like what is that possibility for a middle ground where it's like we are all talking about the same things. We want soil health, we want regen ag, we want pesticide out of our food and chemical reductions, etc. We don't need to fight each other on their party lines
Yeah.
necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I think the potential is limited, right? Like one of the reasons that they oppose, you know, pesticide liability shields and they're involved in that fight is because they see big pharma hiding, like they want to be able to sue pharmaceutical companies for vaccines. And they see a connection there, right? Like they hate the Bayer part of Bayer Monsanto. Um, so I do think that for some of these groups, it's pretty limited, like the most extreme ones. I think for others, And even again within Maha, like there isn't consensus, um, or like their primary focus ends up being on vaccines or uh, attacking Anthony Fauci. Um, but like I think like Kelly Ryerson maybe is a better example of somebody who is more open to working broadly. And you know, I the only thing is that even her I hear sometimes isn't like Maha enough, right? She sometimes could fail the purity test uh, from the groups. So I think it's just you know we'll see what ends up happening.
Arya.
Thanks. Yeah, some really great points, Jeff. I kind of just want to, well, I think it might be worth including in the map of the stated interest some of those like non-food and ag areas, just so that we can acknowledge what Jeff is saying, which is that it is complicated by the fact that you have vaccines and fluoride and chemtrails and other items that will pop into conversation. But I just wanted to, I think, acknowledge that there's some really strategic, smart work happening, I would say, by some of the groups that have been working on these issues for such a long time. And I think there's some real intelligence in not necessarily needing to have like the front and center, getting the credit um, for certain ideas. I think if you're able to point the people who have the loudest megaphone at the moment, which arguably are some of these Maha identifying groups, and point them in the direction of the agencies, the members, the policies that would get the most traction is I just think that that's really smart and well done. So looking at you, Jeff, and others, some of whom are on the call and some who aren't, as something to point out. And then just on a separate so I don't think, Aisha, that that's like getting us more, like it's not getting like Democrats more votes necessarily, but in terms of just like making headway on regen ag policy, having conservative messengers be champions for these policies, I think is just like can't be overstated how important that is. And then just on the Maha strategy report that I dropped into the chat there, or the analysis on it, I think it's just a reminder that having that sort of any mention from the White House or from the Commission where they're stating soil health and related policies as a priority in that report, like that is the sort of ticket that we need to then walk into those agencies to continue to do that advocacy and say the administration is for this, the Maha Commission is for this, and then that we really need to build on that to take that, to get those ideas implemented. So it's really just sort of like an encouragement and a permission slip to keep building on those wins.
John, go ahead.
Yeah.
John, go ahead.
Yeah, I had a question for Jeff, and this is reflecting on your question, Aisha. Rather than imagining a recalibration towards Democrats or towards the left, I'm wondering if you sense that there might be any greater division between state level representatives and federal representatives as they're more beholden to the Maha state power, and what that could look like over the next 3 years.
Yeah, I think there's just so many more opportunities at the states because, it seems like state legislators are more willing to, say, engage with like this new group, or, they're hearing, I think maybe that grassroots power a little bit more locally. Um, so I think there's, that's a huge potential in different states to tap into this network. And hopefully it trickles up, right, as many of those lawmakers move on to Congress.
Any other questions for Jeff or Aisha? Do you want to maybe just start the next section and then we can, I think it's mainly a discussion so we can keep the conversation going.
Yes, sorry. Jess, are you able to screen share again? Awesome. So I am going to drop another document in the chat really quickly that you can open as I am presenting on it a little bit. But essentially, as you can see, as this has been framed up, we spent a lot of time thinking through what it looks like to engage in policy work under this administration with MAHA as the dominant framework that we need to be addressing. And the other thing is most of you on this call already know that this kind of work that we were doing was previously done under a different format that was very focused on the Farm Bill. So that's been another aspect of refiguring out what we need to be addressing because there, you know, there was the extension. Next year, we're going to be right up in the midterm, so it's unlikely that there will be a Farm Bill next year. We're kind of pushing that ball down the line further and further at this point. So looking at really what our priorities are and what is just kind of feasible under this current political climate has been a major topic of interest for us as we're trying to define what we should be spending our energy on. So in terms of what we're working on, what are our leverage points? We generally do want to spend the rest of the time having a bit of a discussion about that. But just to give some framing and context, we started drafting a position paper, which is what I dropped in the chat. Um, Very much a draft. Feel free to comment on it, give feedback, let us know what you think. But at a high level, it just reflects some of the key leverage points that we've already identified that are also on this slide, which is continuing to ensure that soil health and regenerative agriculture remain central pillars in policy recommendations. We know that that is, again, as we talked about plenty, that is a purported stated area of interest for MAHA. We also know that there is not clear action being taken on it yet. Somewhat anecdotally, two of the bills that we previously championed, the Soil Care Act and the Streamlining Conservation Practice Standard Act, are both moving forward. The Streamlining Act in particular, even previously, was really favored by a lot of conservative groups. So that is sort of taken on life of its own. We're working with some, to your point, Aria, some conservative groups like ACC and their Nature is Nonpartisan sort of lobby arm to trying to find the right pathway for that forward. And then the Soil Care Act, interestingly, somewhat, is been much harder to move forward for it being very focused on regenerative agriculture and soil health and education and voluntary um, aspects relating to the producers themselves. It's gotten kind of stuck. It was obviously introduced by a Democrat previously. That bill had not been bipartisan, but we are willing to strip it down and rework it to match whatever it needs to under this current administration, using stewardship instead of climate, et cetera. But even working with some of our aligned MAHA partners, it's really hitting a bit of a wall. So it's interesting to see when and where they are willing to, take ownership of something and make it their own, and when maybe there's just not the traction for it yet. The other part of that is that we also don't know, as I think Erica mentioned, we don't know what's happening at USDA. There's a lot of talk about what might be coming in the next year in terms of restructuring and new programming, but it could be that offices have some sense or that there's been some dictation that, bills on this subject matter are not really of interest at this point. It's there's not a lot of communication coming out about what's happening there, so we'll have to wait and see. But some bills are moving forward, others are not. We'll be doing what we can to keep them focused on soil health and regen ag. There's also the stewardship caucus in the Senate that was introduced, and that is another potential for trying to find leverage points. Although, again, other than the switch to that terminology, we haven't seen a lot of action on what they plan to do or what their focuses will really be in terms of policy. So a lot to just track as we enter into the new year there. Main point of discussion, obviously, as we go into that piece is just identification of the gaps, where MAHA is working and where we can align or elevate other issues. So anything that you want to continue talking about or that we've missed, feel free to bring up. And then the last part is just making sure that we are really acting as the container for this work, this early framing of coalition-wide alignment on regenerative principles and technical assistance as prerequisites for scale has been central to so many groups in this space work for the past couple of years. So being able to have this sort of broad coalition to create a unified front on these topics is just something that we want to make sure that we're continuing to help lead and keep the energy up behind that, because we've seen how much that ability to present as a unified front is a strength for MAHA. And so keeping the momentum going in the same way on these particular issues in a very bipartisan, neutral, issue focused way is critical for our work going forward. So the next slides, and I think if you want to go out of presentation mode, Jess, was really just to go into a little bit of a discussion point. If there's any leverage points for RPI that anyone wants to mention or identify, or things, this could also be things that we've, you know, discussed already, but you have additional thoughts on, or things that you've seen others working on. Thinking of, like you mentioned, Aria, who are other MAHA centered groups that we might want to bring some of these issues up with, and reach out to. We're doing some of that already, but I'm sure we're missing some out there. Anybody? Anybody seen anything working? Seen anybody working that they've been surprised by? Best story for soil health or regen that we're not aware of yet?
Well, we talked a little bit about states, and I'm curious, if there are opportunities at the state level to do, similar to like Maryland has their cover crop incentive program, or other states trying to do um, certain tax breaks for conservation practices. What is within their kind of purview?
I'd love to hear if anyone's heard anything else from states. We had been teeing up some work with the state of Colorado that they had to back burner because they need to keep schools open and kids fed. And we've heard the same from a number of other states that 2026 is going to be really uncertain because they're all facing double or triple billion-dollar deficits from federal funding. But also there is Judith McGreary has been doing some great work in Texas. Texas legislature only meets every other year, so they don't come back till 27, unless they want to redistrict the state last minute. So there might be some opportunities in Texas to build some pieces over this year and carry it forward. So, but we under our previous banner, we did do a bunch of state work early in 2025. So if anyone hears of pieces where we can support or share language, especially around sort of regenerative or some of these other pieces to make sure states are aligning, let us know.
Yeah, like there
Actually,
is the Sandy, you were saying there's the brand new one, and Aisha and I looked into that, and we actually did a scan of all conservation type funding in the whole country, different funding states, tax credits, bonds, all sorts of, fees and things that people are charging and then putting into conservation. Um, and I think that has been happening, and it's but it hasn't so far. I haven't seen it connected at all with Maha. But I'd be curious if anybody knows an example of anything kind of in the soil health state policy that has been connected with Maha folks.
Sandy, is that the tax credit bill? Oh gosh, it's a member from like southwestern Colorado. He's also a farmer. I can see him. I just cannot think of his name.
Yeah, and I am not currently up on the details. I was just looking for them again. I was
Okay.
just
I can
thinking
dig him
about,
out too. Because we were
but
working
yeah,
with Mandy McGill on one last year, and that's gotten
right,
scuttled for 26. So,
right.
um, Clive, Clive something.
That name rings a bell.
Okay.
Yes.
I
Yes.
love it when I'm not just making things up. So yeah,
It
we
does ring
should.
a bell. I'm not sure if he's the
Okay.
one, but
Simpson,
yeah.
Clive Simpson. That's his name.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, it just seems to me that so far Maha really hasn't, yeah, they really haven't really taken regenerative agriculture really under their wing.
No.
And I wonder if there are better ways to message and communicate to Maha around soil health. Like you'd be helping children get healthier and, helping farmers and, be more resilient and just, I don't know, like just more of a focus there. I mean, obviously there are people like Kelly Ryerson that this is what she's all about, right? There are some, but I think overall it just doesn't seem to be such a big focus.
I also, and I love how you said that, Erica, something that the Soil and Climate Alliance has really been focusing on, and we've sort of called it the Maha without Maha work, is all of these things that Maha's talking about. None of it's new when it comes to soil health. And so connecting in with those folks who said, yeah, it's important, but maybe, don't fully understand it or don't, understand the whole system. That's great. Come join us. Let's talk about it. Let's bring, we've been doing this work, people have been doing this work for 20, 30 years. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. How can we, while people are fired up about what's in our food, how's our food being grown, let's show them the ways that it's being done right and, get them to those resources. You know what? If you're telling me I have an opportunity to make up a conspiracy theory, Carolina, I'm in.
I mean, let's be real. Like that's people.
I didn't even see that.
Aria's
I
shaking her
like.
head
I
again.
I know it's ridiculous, but like, woof.
Yeah.
That's yeah. There's been some really interesting literature coming out actually,
Yes.
about how conspiracies create community.
Mm-hmm.
That really just explains the moment we're in right now. And so, like, I say that like, ha ha ha, but no, really.
Yeah. Dawn, I see your hand too.
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out, you're being Maha specific, but I'm thinking of soil health. We all should recognize that over the past 50 years, the nutritional value of our food supply has been reduced by over 50%, and that's mostly due to the use of fertilizer, not necessarily killing weeds. And I'm trying to make the connection. There's a big story that came out in Iowa, the excess nitrates from a water study that they're trying to squelch, the big ag companies. The water study for the Des Moines area and the two big rivers that go through Iowa has now produced the most cancer causing incidents in the United States, all due to nitrates. And so fertilizer runoff is a big issue, probably includes the pesticides. But
Mm-hmm.
as far as nutritional value, a lot of that's just from the use of too much fertilizer and not using microbes to grow the plant food. So I'm not sure how if this ties into your Maha RP leverage points, but that is my concern: is too much fertilizer use, and it needs to be reduced along with reducing inputs, which is a major factor or component of regen ag. So
Mm-hmm.
just my comment.
I think to Don's point, highlighting those health effects on kids, has been like the most Maha thing, for us.
Well, okay, glyphosate, for example, that's a big thing. And the latest thing I saw from a group is from, let's see, it's from, where did I put it here? Farmer's Footprint. You've probably just seen the emails on it. They're doing a glyphosate um, program to reduce
Mm-hmm.
glyphosate. So that has really been a big issue
Or
as far as the impact on cellular structure within humans.
or
So I guess that ties
nitrate
in.
nitrate pollution and uh, blue baby syndrome, right? Like those types of
It's just
connections.
terrible. I don't know, I'll be spending some emphasis on what we do in our group, fighting off excess fertilizer use. And what was the other one? Well, that's my main point, I guess.
Yeah. One.
Hi, everyone. No, about what Don was saying, I think it's right on. And I would add that not only fertilizer is responsible for these externalities, but glyphosate and pesticides in general, but glyphosate uh, acts as a scrubber, binding all the metals and cations and anions of, it was conceived as a industrial scrubber. So part of what we see in terms of what was shared in the chat in terms of nutrient non-dense foods that are produced that we're producing today as a result of our aggression to soils is due to fertilizers, but also pesticides like glyphosate, which bind the metals. But I also wanted to recognize that we are in a great time in terms of unifying the language between what we've been preaching for the last 30, 50 years and the interest of MAHA in advancing these policies. And I think we needed to find common language, and soil health, regen practices, and nutrient dense foods, I think, are the common binders of the two bands. And another thing I wanted to say is, does anyone know how much money in percent goes to subsidize industrial agriculture, conventional agriculture, versus how much goes to subsidize organic regenerative agriculture and so on? Because I think somebody mentioned tax breaks, and that's a good start, but to really empower more people to start lifting the page into regenerative ag practices is money, and people need a head start, and I think subsidies are a part of the game. I wouldn't go as far as payment for ecosystem services yet, but probably that's something that could be discussed later. Thank you.
Yeah. Just want to flag, we've got about 2 minutes left before this call wraps. It's really interesting. I've been having a number of conversations with people, and end of the year, it's time to planning for next year and all that, just continuing to pull it back to the soil and pull let everything focus there. And then because the soil is the basis for so much, pieces can grow from there. So that's a really justifying point for this work that we've been doing, because it's always been sort of soil based. And while we think about where else to go and where else to pull people in, but then connect it back to the soil. So any last thoughts?
Common ground.
Well, I will I have a last thought actually. I've been listening. I'm in New Mexico with the New Mexico Healthy Soil Working Group. Have not really interacted with MAHA. I commend everybody who has done all this excellent work, trying to figure out what they say and what they do. I'm pretty concerned, very concerned actually, that this whole hour and also the previous meetings, we really haven't talked about social and environmental justice. And that was a sticking point with the regenerative movement from the beginning. And it feels to me like, yeah, I'm wondering if this group is just kind of dropping that in favor of these new playmates. And I'm just challenging you all to do the math and to think about, is it worth it, or should we do the math? Yeah, I'm pretty concerned about that.
Thank you so much for bringing that up, Isabel. Incredibly important. And I know for Aisha and my sake, a lot of what we do in our other work is like largely like justice focused. And it is sort of weird to say, like, are we aligning, are we forgetting these core values to be so focused on this? I think it's a very important question that we should continue to ask ourselves.
And I would add that the position paper does include, I mean, that's a key tenet of Soil and Climate Alliance, is to make sure that equity and equality and inclusivity are all centered. It's a key part of our work, and it is reflected in the position paper, which we didn't get into the details of it in terms of discussing. So it is there, but I think that's a good flag in general, because that does tend to, when we play on their terms, which is to ignore that, we do run a risk for sure. And so figuring out how we can both be politically strategic, knowing that those are like, I mean, we all know funding was literally cut for producers who had said that they were Black in their application, that this was an urban agricultural project, et cetera. Like these were verboten topics under this administration. And so there's a very fine line between being able to enter a conversation and also not let those values get left behind.
Well, and it was actually really interesting. So the Soil and Climate Alliance, SCA, we do a big annual meeting in person. Last year we happened to be in Atlanta on Juneteenth, and we had probably a quarter of the room is politically conservative, and a bunch of those folks are Maha aligned. They had no problem with, because I snuck it in and we talked a lot about Juneteenth, and we had our co-executive director, who is a fabulous Black woman with a background in DEI and PhDs in it, present on the history of race in the South and how it's affected the food and ag system. And they all agreed with it. Nope, like they thought it was fantastic. Everybody wanted more. It was really interesting that when we just put it out there, everyone was like, yeah, definitely. But so I agree, it's very hard to play with, and balancing that with some of the other pieces of Maha are very, very hard for us. And so, but yes, keep pushing us on that. Don't ever stop. If we don't say it enough, then yell at us, Isabel. We'd love for you to do that, because it's so key. And that's how, we're all centered there. And I think that's how we use our work to protect those groups, so that we make it through the next few years and can go back to funding and supporting the way we should. So, all right, my friends, we will be back the first week in January. If there's not a ton of updates by then, we might kick it a week just to see, but just keep an eye on your calendars and we'll send out emails and let you know. But otherwise, enjoy the last month of 2025. Spend time with friends and family. Eat as many cookies as you can possibly get your hands on. Send me some cookies. And if you need anything in the next month, ping me, Erica, Aisha, and we will talk to you all soon.